All right, so let's get started with toddlers. Physical development for toddlers, um, as far as that goes, we're going to see that at 1 year of age, their physical growth kind of slows down a little bit. So they might gain about 3 inches a year in height, and typically will get about 3 to 5 pounds per year in weight. So if we think about that as being, an infant who weighs 7 pounds at birth, by one, they should triple in weight, right? So that would be at 21 pounds. So then somewhere between 1 and 2, they should gain 3 to 5 pounds. So around 26 pounds by the time they're 2, just depending on their birth weight and their growth status with family and genetics and things like that. So in the early years of being a toddler, their heads are still really disproportionate. They're very head heavy. And oftentimes 1-year-olds are just starting to walk, and so they are hitting their head a lot. You will see a major amount of bruising across that frontal um, head. They also are in the anal stage as far as Freud's stages. In Erikson, that 1 to 3-year-old zone is autonomy versus shame and doubt. And they are starting to transition from sensorimotor to pre-operational with Piaget. So that early part of toddlerhood corresponds with Piaget's fifth substage of cognitive development, which we call the tertiary circular reactions. And that's when toddlers experiment and learn new behaviors. And then they transition into mental combinations, which is another stage of Piaget within the whole Piaget cognitive development piece. And they start to understand cause and effect and problem solving, and they start to solve simple problems like puzzles or putting blocks up on top of each other. And they're also able to start to imitate others. And a lot of their behavior is really what they see other people doing. So most of their energy during this period is really not dedicated to physical growth. It's really dedicated to all of that kind of developmental physical stages. And so what you see is more mobility, right? They explore things, they sense things, they're getting newly acquired gross motor skills, and they're starting to run, to jump, to move up and down, and starting to go up and down stairs a little bit easier. And by around 3, oftentimes they'll start to ride a tricycle, that sort of thing, as far as large motor development. And I know that there's a lot of growth that happens in that 1 to 3-year-old zone, but things that we want to look for are they able to grasp food? Are they able to hold a spoon? Are they able to hold a large crayon? And the artwork changes a little bit as they get more closer to that 3-year-old zone. We look for them to be able to start to copy circles. They'll also copy crosses. And things that they draw are starting to actually look like what they want it to. And as they develop all of those fine motor skills, I laugh because this is never in your textbook, but really when you're assessing fine motor skills, if you see a child picking their nose, you know they have fine motor skills. And so you can utilize all these other stages, but really you'll kind of see it in what kids do just naturally. And so the next, as far as talking about the Piaget and those mental combinations, like just looking at these pictures, you kind of see, oh, yeah, my mental combination is now I'm a mommy, I have this baby, I have to feed the baby, I have to imitate mom with the baby. You'll see even baby brothers, breastfeeding the baby doll because they see their mother breastfeeding the second child or the third child. And then they also start to understand that cause and effect. If I drop this, it falls, it goes away, right? Cause and effect. If I let go of these balloons, I won't have them anymore. And they realize that some things go away and are gone forever. So one of the fun parts of having toddlers between the age of 1 and 3 is that they love repetition, and this also drives parents absolutely bonkers, right? So they love routines, they love having predictability. That seems to help their little worlds quite a bit. But then they want to do everything over and over and over again. So whether that is watching the same video over and over and over again, whether that is watching the same YouTube video, whether that is playing the same silly game that, in a moment you turn them upside down and flip them around and spin them or something like that. And then they want to do that every single moment of that hour. And that is really how they're learning, right? So they're learning part of that cause and effect. And that time that they spend is actually helping them to develop their brain. So language is starting to take off at that 1 to 3 year old stage. They're able to listen, they can understand short explanations. This is a time when they start to become a little bit more understandable. They may be using some sign language. They may be saying, it's usually based on something they need. I want a drink, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry. They may use their name in place of I. They don't really use pronouns. Um, or they use one pronoun for everybody. Some people, kind of worry about language, and really the normal of what we want is, um, a minimum of 15 words at 15 months, and 2 years they should have at least 20 words. And we want those words to assign meaning, right? So those words should have meaning, and sometimes they are goofy words that don't fit with the word that you would think. They're mispronouncing something, or they have a completely different sounding word for an item. But it should make sense. It should make sense to the child, and it should make sense to the family, not always the outside eye. And what's really important to remember at this age is that parents get really frustrated because they have children that are throwing fits. And typically, fits are thrown for two reasons. One is they don't get what they want, and so they throw a fit, and that works, right? But the other is because they can't communicate, or they can't clearly express what it is that they need. So they have a desire, and they learn that words help them to get what they need. And when children have language difficulty, or they have processing difficulty, and they aren't necessarily being able to communicate well, um, when they don't have those 15 or those 20 words that get their needs across, they get very frustrated. And just like us, if we can't communicate to someone next to us, we get frustrated. How many times do we get misaligned in communication? And so it's really important to help parents understand that language development is super important, and there's a wide variety of where kids are in their language, but that using sign language and continuing to help children with, pronunciation just a little bit at a time, really focusing in on just communicating with their child, and their child communicating successfully to them will help them to kind of reduce all of that catastrophe that we call the terrible twos. And so, some of that frustration that kids have and the temper tantrums that they throw, um, it's kind of just the toddler way. It's really because they're like little cavemen, and they have what they need, and they want what they need, and they want this, and if they don't get it, they have a little bit of a meltdown or a breakdown because they're very hedonistic, or very, I want centered. And that's kind of that whole, goes back to Freud and their egocentrism that they have. We do know that, as they hit these years, they start to develop that reward and punishment and pre-conventional piece of Kohlberg's moral development. And they say, oh, I know I've done this and I'm good, so now I get a reward, and they do it more often. And they say, oh, I was really bad, and they hopefully, when they get punished, will start to say no. So timeouts are used a lot. Can be fairly effective for some parents, of course. Swatting and hitting and spanking is pretty highly discouraged today, just because we know that there's some long-term ramifications of kids that are spanked. But of course, there's a still large part of our society that believes that spanking is the right way to raise up a kid. And there may be some validity to that, but also we're finding that that has an impact on people's personalities even 20 years later. So milestones that you really have to look at and say, yes, these have to be accomplished by 3. They should be able to run. They should be able to alternate leg running, riding a simple trike. They should be able to stand on a foot briefly, and by briefly I mean a couple of 3 seconds, right? They should be able to start to leap off the ground, so little hops. Usually with both feet, they don't typically hop on one foot a whole lot. And they should be able to go up and down the stairs alternating their feet. So by 3 years old, they should be able to alternate down, alternate up. They will still need to hold on to a rail, they will still need the wall, that sort of thing. They should be able to copy a circle, copy a cross. And by 3 years old, if you think about that block tower, it should be getting higher, right? So at 1, you might start with 2, and by the time they're 3, you should be, up to 7 or 8 at least blocks when they set up a tower. And the expectation is that when they set up these towers, that is so that they can tear them down, or If they set them up and someone else tears them down, they might be disappointed and angry and frustrated that someone else has torn it down because they like the action, right? So by 3 years old, they should be able to take off their clothing, so they should be able to undress. They should have started toilet training. They're not always completely done, but by 3, there should be a start to toilet training. And that's really important to know in neglect cases when you have kids that show up at 3 that haven't even started or initiated. Sometimes that's neglect and sometimes it's a developmental delay that we need to address. They should start to know some shapes. Circle, square, triangle should be fairly basic. They should start to like and be interested in books. If you see kids that are not interested in books at 3 years old, you kind of wonder if there are any books at home or if anybody's reading to them, and so that's a great time to intervene and be really good role models. And so by 3 years old, they should be using phrases, right? So they should have a pretty good, like 50, at least 50 words, that they're utilizing. And they might be, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, me thirsty. They might be like, dog is wet, it might be just very simple phrases. And then they should be able to start to follow more complicated instructions. So instead of just the one step, they should probably by 3 years old be up to 2 or 3 steps. Go pick up your toys, and they may need some reminders, but put your toy in the basket or put your boots, by the door. And then they should have absolute favorites of everything. Favorite foods, favorite blanket, favorite stories, favorite movies, favorite YouTube channel, whatever. And so they start to build kind of their little personality and repetitiveness that all kind of goes with what they like. So how do we help parents survive the toddler years? I know this is always much harder when they have 2 children who are toddlers, when they have the 1-year-old and the 3-year-old, or the 2-year-old and the 4-year-old are pretty close still too. So it is important that we remind parents that there's an end in sight. Oftentimes when women are pregnant and they are thinking the pregnancy will never end and they're a little nervous, they're like, I don't know what to expect or how long this one. Just like that, this will also come to an end, and that there'll be a new stage that happens that they will probably likely enjoy. So we really want to help teach parents, coping skills, and that oftentimes includes, parent timeout. So a little bit of respite. How do we get parents to take that time out and to work together as a team? It's also important to put it in a context that they'll understand. With one child, parents outnumber the kid. With 2, it's man-to-man defense, kind of like a basketball. Man-to-man, you can kind of like, okay, you got her, I got him. All right, we're going to go to our separate corners and get those kids separated, or help them to work their problems out. When couples have a 3rd child or more, it becomes zone defense, right? So it becomes where one child has to take these 2 kids, and one parent takes the other one. You rarely leave one, with 3 men to defend. You kind of have to help parents plan that out and to realize that the game changes with each addition to the family. It's also important to assess what sort of discipline strategies that they're using and, giving them more independence and coaching parents to give their kids independence. Promoting consistency and telling parents how important that is. And, really modeling the utilization of praise, because a lot of parents don't necessarily think of praise as being something that children really need and thrive off of, but they really do. And I know this is super basic, but it is really important for parents to understand that they need to feed their child regularly. I know they do need reminders.